gentrification problem. We really do. And I don't think we understand how bad it really is. See, because Seattle's population as of 2020 is 787,000 people, give or take a few thousand here, right? So out of that 780 some thousand people that are in Seattle, just Seattle by itself, only 6.9 of them are black. See the problem there? Which means is white, which is about 67.6%, give or take a point, is white. Now, if we take the areas outside of King County and see how they've grown from 2010 to 2018, then 2010, there was four some number, you know, the methodology. Being
Teal Sean, you might want to turn off your video and speak because I think we're having trouble hearing you. We can't hear Teal Sean. We should probably go to the, oh, there she is.
I can't, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Go ahead, Teal Sean.
Yeah, I think you're muted. I can't hear you. All right. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, so moral of the story is if we take at least 50% of the police budget, they get $410 million a year right now, annually, which is way too much for the police. And since we all like numbers, I'm gonna give you guys some. Okay, 82% of the budget of $410 million or $306 million spent on salaries, benefits, and overtime for 2,000 people. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but that to me is a bit excessive. $306 million for 2,000 people, that's ridiculous. Hell, I mean, defunding by 50% is a great start, but I would really like to see like a little more, but it's a great start though, because you can take that money you take from them and put it back into these black communities. There's no our communities, okay? Because these ain't been our communities since the beginning of time. Everybody wants to talk about our community this, our community that. Okay, great. Well, our communities aren't getting murdered. Our communities aren't facing sentencing disparities. Our community profile. So when you talk about these demands they want, be specific. Be specific with your demands. Because you guys keep talking about our community. Okay, that's great. But what has our community done for the black community? And the black community is what really needs that money. You know what I'm saying? It's not about our communities anymore. Because our communities had a chance. Our communities had a chance to take care of each other and they didn't. So now, taxing Amazon, we're well within our rights to say, well, this first round of money we're going to put into the central district or we're going to put into the south end to go towards schooling or family services or social services or whatever in black neighborhoods. Don't get this money. Don't try to defund them and take the money and put it to communities that ain't black communities, because that's not where that money needs to go. So for all you black community leaders out there that are supposed to be black community leaders, whatever, that's cool. But do right by your black communities, because helping every community is not going to help the Black community. We've been helping every other community. Why can't we help ourselves? See, because we're the ones getting discriminated against. We're the ones being murdered. We're the ones that the harassment happens to. We're the ones. You guys want some more numbers? Here goes another number. 21% of the police time is spent doing mental health stuff. 21% of their time spent transporting and dealing with mental health stuff.
Here in the front.
So we have to pay them $410 million to spend 21% of their time dealing with mental issues, mental patients, or people with going through mental crises. Okay, here's another number. 31% of the time when the police points their gun, they're pointing at a Black man or a Black person. Since we all like numbers, that's a solid number you can Google and see for yourself. So when we talk about taking this money from Amazon and the police, we need to talk about putting it back into Black communities to sustain Black communities, because Rainier Beach High School is known for nothing but sports. And that's not right, because I know a bunch of brilliant kids that go there. They're brains and they're smart. They're smart, but they get silenced because that school is only known for athletics. So you mean to tell me that I can send my nephew there and all they're going to think of him is, oh, he's going to be a football player, he's going to be a basketball player. They won't think he wants to be a doctor or something? No, because that's not what the system was designed for over in this area, in the south end of Seattle. That's not what the system was designed for. It was designed for these kids to either go to school or be in the streets. That's what it was designed for. And it's working how it was designed. But here's the problem. I'm tired of it because the education street prison pipeline is real. I'm a product of it. So it's real. And I'm tired of seeing these young kids go through that pipeline when they don't have to, when they can have the same opportunities as a kid in Redmond or Bellevue. If we can all come together as a collective, as a whole, as a unit, cohesively, and defund the SPD and tax Amazon cohesively as a unit and put it back into these Black communities. That's how we affect change here in Seattle. That's how we do this together. It's no Black over white or white over Black. No, as much as I'm pro-Black like anybody else, but I'm smart enough to know that we all have to do this together. So let's all get out here and do this together, hand in hand, differences of opinions or not, cohesively together, and let's defund the police and tax Amazon and put the money back into these Black communities where it's needed. Because if we're not gonna put the money back into the communities, the Black communities where it's needed, then what are we gonna do with the money, huh? According to the mayor's proposal, she wants to take money from every other department but the police. I think she's proposing between a 5 and a 10% budget cut for the police. What? $20 million. What is $20 million a year gonna solve? Let's be real. It doesn't really solve much in this city, because from what I'm hearing, Seattle's gonna be about $300 million in debt after all this COVID stuff anyways, probably a little more now. So what is $20 million in a Black community that's already been impoverished? Black people live 30.6% below the poverty rate. So I think the mayor needs to go back with her community leaders and redraw that plan, because no, we're tired of asking them to do stuff for us. We're tired. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm tired. I'm starting to demand it now, because either you guys are going to do it or we're going to put you in a corner to make you do it. It's just that simple. It's that simple. So either be on the right side of history or be part of the problem. And the right side of history will be to defund SPD by 50% and tax Amazon. It's a no-brainer. If you have to think about it, then you're obviously not here for the right reasons, and you really should go educate yourself a little more and get on the same page and get here for the right reasons. Because these Black communities have been impoverished by the city for so many years. And it's just, we're tired of it now. Now we've had it to the point where we're just tired of it now. We're not going to put up with it anymore. So now it's on us as a community to put pressure on these politicians to actually step up and do what they're here for, because we elected them. We put the politicians into power. That is, us as people did that. So now it's on us as people to make them do what the people want. So let's defund SPD by 50% and tax Amazon, guys. And let's get all on the same page. Differences in opinion and all, we still got to do this together as a cohesive unit, regardless of, we don't have to like each other's opinions, but let's do this together, because that's the only way. We all got one common goal: for Black lives to matter and to take care of these Black communities. We have the answers. So let's put them into play. Let's get on the same page and put them into play, and let's do it. Because a plan without action is just merely that, a plan. So let's get some action behind this plan. That's it.
I couldn't agree more, Tealshan. We
That's all I got.
absolutely need action, and only plans will not be enough. And I also really appreciate what you said, that
We
in
can't hear you.
reality,
We can't hear you.
if you're going to be with Black Lives Matter, then you have to actually, if politicians are going to say that Black Lives Matter, then they have to fight alongside us and stand with the movement that is demanding defunding the police by at least 50% and taxing Amazon, so that we can begin to address the affordable housing crisis. And in fact, I think it's important to recognize the pressure that our movement has built on the establishment already, and we know that movements work. We just won, activists like Tealshan, and actually our next speaker, Tristan Spears, have been on the front lines of fighting directly against police violence, getting maced and tear gassed every night. And it was because of the kind of solidarity that Tealshan mentioned, people standing together, that we were able to win this unanimous vote. Just 2 weeks ago on the city council, our movement won this incredible victory where we made Seattle the first city in the nation to have passed a ban on the use and purchase by Seattle police of any kind of chemical weapons, or the so-called crowd control weapons that they use to try and quash social movements. And so we know that building movements works. The other sign is also the momentum that the Amazon tax movement has built. Just yesterday, the Bloomberg magazine, which is, it's very much a publication for the capitalist class. It is definitely not a socialist magazine. They published an article saying, which was headlined, Amazon may have to deliver new tax revenue to Seattle. So it's just an incredible momentum that the Justice for George Floyd movement and the uprising has lent to the demand related to police violence. And also, as Tealshan was saying, if you don't understand that the question of addressing gentrification funded by taxing big business is also part of the Black Lives Matter movement, then there is time to do a little bit more reading. And on that note, I wanted to invite Tristan Spears, who's also, like Tealshan, a native of Seattle, who has been involved with community-based youth organizations, and like Tealshan, has helped gather hundreds of signatures to defund the police at the recent rallies and at the Capitol Hill organized protest. Welcome, Tristan.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. Can everybody hear me? Just want to make sure. So, into playing off of what Tealshan was saying, I've been there with the purpose of standing in solidarity for my Black community, not for the purpose of partying at CHOP or whatever people want to call it at this point. We do still manage to hold marches at this time. So people are always invited to come to those. Those will be held at 8 o'clock every day. We join that at Cal Anderson Park at 7. So, but into the point of what we're doing here is to speak on the matters at hand and what is so important about making sure that we tax Amazon and defund the city police. One of the main things that I'm concerned about is today, I didn't really prepare for this. I was brought in last moment, but in the way coming home today, I got this flyer from the South Lake Union Whole Foods, which is of course owned by Jeff Bezos. And it's due to the fact that they were, stigmatizing employees for wearing face masks, COVID masks, which they want people to wear, that had slogans on them relating to Black lives after Jeff Bezos just donated $10,000. I'm sorry, excuse me, I lied, $10 million to these causes, but can't pay a lick of, federal or state taxes to. But I want, after last night's march, I saw some of his employees and just asked them for humor. You guys pay taxes, right? And, of course, but Jeff Bezos doesn't. It's crazy. He expects his employees who don't even make enough to live in the city to pay taxes, but yet he himself can't. It'd take like 2 employees at the warehouse working full time to be able to afford a 1-bedroom in the city typically. And then you think about COVID and what we're going through in the Black community of being the most affected, that 6% that Tealshan was talking about in our city could become lower. Just due to COVID itself. People got to remember that this is still going on, and bringing back the economy. starting with defunding the police is going to be huge. I mean, this is the most overpaid police force in the country. We're not that high violent city that people try to make us out to be. I've been involved in these streets for, you know, on from growing up in them to trying to bring people out of them. This past years of being a father and seeing what my worth is in the community and what I can do for the youth, is especially where I try to target people while they're still young. So I know that that's where our focus needs to be. And, you know, for the city to not hand over the building from the youth center back over to youth care is a slap in the face to the taxpayers, because now, I mean, that's one of the best organizations in the city, in the state, for youth. And I mean, a lot of people rely on them for, you name it, as a child in the streets. And for the city to just back them down like that and not give them what they deserve is just terrible. So bringing these funds is essential. Keeping that police department is essential, because I mean, where else are we going to put them? You guys have people want to sit here and make up what the problem is with having these people in the streets and hanging out and doing drugs all over the place, but you ain't making no solutions. You don't got no plans for it. So if you're just going to sit there and talk about it, stay on the sideline and watch, because these policies are going to bring forth change that are actually sound and quite possible. I mean, like I said before, if you look at the World Trade Organization and how they brought back in '99 the little meeting they wanted to bring about here that Seattle stopped, that had an effect on the world economy. I mean, so we're just trying to have an effect on our local economy, and we have the power to do that here. And, you know, with our council member Sawant leading this, I mean, you know, last time we got it done, but it got repealed. It's going to be done this time on a better status because we have more support. We have the community backing it, and people want to sit here and pretend that they're not. But again, today, driving home here in South Lake Union, I'm watching these employees and people gather in front of the Whole Foods Market and try to hand out these flyers saying that they're in support of solidarity with Black Lives Matter. So in regards to their policies, we want to hear more about why their policies and what their definitions for specific words are for why they're trying to harass employees for simply wearing masks that have words that say I can't breathe or whatever they might be. But another thing is we need to address the housing crisis here in Seattle, and these funds will go towards that. When I first moved back into Seattle after being homeless, I had hardships. I mean, for one, being a felon, for two, being colored. I didn't think I was going to make it, honestly. But, you know, there's, by the grace of God, I'm here today. So, I mean, I had to fight. I was denied, and I had to file a Seattle Office of Civil Rights complaint, because I'm not just going to let my rights be overridden on me if I can do something about it, you know. So I went about that route, and it's just sad that I had to go through that route for when I was already right to get what I was already due. Because, I mean, it's the first come, first serve policies here in Seattle, and they're still cherry picking. If you're colored, they just don't want you. You're not desirable. But yet here in this city, this is the only place in the Pacific Northwest region where we're the Oregon Territory that Black people could live, you know. My grandmother's church was gentrified here in the Central District. So I know how this feels. And I'm trying to fight to come back. This is ridiculous. So, you know, taxing Amazon, defunding the police, again, like I said, is essential. Keeping that police department for our youth to have a place to go to so that they don't have to belong in these streets or feel that that's the only place they could turn to because home isn't welcoming. It's
Tristan, we can't hear you right now.
Anyways, so if we're being lied to by our government, we really can't trust them. And they don't have no plans because they don't even know what's going on, so they say. So it's really up to us, the people, to stand up and make these changes to make things right because, again, we can't rely on our government. Fortunately, we have enough people in our movement that are standing up and bringing attention worldwide here in Seattle to what we're doing, and it will, like I said, continue to follow. $15 minimum wage, thank you, Sawant. That was led by you, standing against this new juvenile, you know, which is another place that ruined my life here in Seattle. Just, you know, she's led a lot of these movements, and for those reasons, I support, you know, a lot of what she does. But we need to invest into these things and bring forth policies and that actually address racial discrimination instead of just having these so-called haphazard policies that don't really, that say that they protect people of color, but they really don't. Because I'm a product of that. I got reports on that. I can prove this, that they don't. So we need to start really putting our money where our mouth is and taking our money back that belongs to us from this overpaid police department that terrorizes us and gasses us and peaceful protesters become radicalized by. I mean, this is ridiculous, Seattle. We're better than this, and we have to get it together. So, thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak on behalf of my community. I have a lot to say tonight still at this march. And again, if we don't do this now, it's going to get worse. So I just hope that everybody understands that the Black community is not asking for, you guys to just watch us seek revenge, because that's not the narrative. We're seeking recognition, not revenge. So pay attention and educate yourselves. And if everybody, was to love each other like they love themselves and their family, then we could just make this world a better place. So let's work on that. Everybody enlighten yourselves, because if myself can do it, then anybody can. Let's do this, guys. It's about the unity in the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tristan. I really love that you talked about unity, and also as you can everybody hear me? As Tristan pointed out, I mean, the links between the same corporations that have been fighting viciously against any kind of policy, whether it's $15 an hour or renters' rights or the Amazon tax, as we've been fighting for recently, the links between the same corporations that oppose any of those policies and police violence are so it's just an intricate web, and it really shows that all of it ultimately relates to the way the capitalist system works.
I'm terribly sorry. I can't hear nobody. Black Lives Matter.
Thanks, Tristan. I'm not sure why you're not able to hear me. Maybe if you mute yourself and sort of go off camera, maybe it'll help. I'm not sure. But anyway, I was just on that point. I think the Guardian newspaper published a very important article a few days ago, which was titled "How Target, Google, Bank of America, and Microsoft, and Amazon is part of this too, quietly fund police through private donations." And it talks about how when you look at these so-called police foundations, these corporations funnel so much money, tens of millions of dollars, to these police foundations, and these police foundations quietly allow and enable police departments across the nation to pile up military-grade weapons that are used against Black and brown people and against protest movements, and how they also provide, they're in hand in glove with the political establishment, and they provide cover to the police, because the kind of violence that activists like Tristan and Teal Sean and many others, and Joey Weiser, whom we'll have later on in the program, have faced at 11th and Pine on Capitol Hill, that violence was not just sanctioned by the police chief. It was under the watch of the Democratic establishment, Mayor Durkan, that this happened. And so it is no surprise at all that among the Democratic Party rank and file, among the activists in the movement, tens of thousands of people are now calling on Jenny Durkan to resign because, as they've said, no mayor who tear gases her own people should be allowed to stand. But it really shows the web between the police departments, the political establishments in all these cities, and the corporations themselves. And in a little while, we're going to hear from activists in New York City and Chicago as well, leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement in those cities. And they will also give examples of how that's exactly how it works in those other cities, because that's how capitalism functions. And in order to really make a breakthrough, as Teal Sean and Tristan said, if they can do it, so can we. They're both examples of people who've been through the brutal mass incarceration system, and yet here they are on the front lines of fighting for a better society. And in our struggle for a better society, it is extremely important the role that the labor movement can play, because when we fight as workers, as a working class, there's an incredible potential to build the kind of unity that our speakers are talking about, because it allows us to see in a crystal clear manner that black workers and white workers, we face different kinds of oppressions, and absolutely it is the moral and political duty of all workers, regardless of their race, to fight against black oppression, to fight against police violence, and to stand on the front lines with our black and brown sisters and brothers and siblings, and at the same time recognize that these oppressions are part and parcel
Press
of
for truth as
the
well.
exploitative system of capitalism, because capitalism itself is a police state. And so pushing forward the struggle inside the labor movement has been and will continue to be an important component of the nationwide fight against police violence and against economic exploitation. And so I wanted to invite Logan Swan next to speak with us, because he's been on the front lines of the fight to tax big businesses, the fight to have a democratic rank and file led labor movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and has an important message of how we can build the kind of solidarity we need, because the labor movement really was built on the idea that an injury to one is an injury to all. So we all need to be on the front lines against racism. Welcome, Logan.
Yeah, my name's Logan Swan. I'm a rank and file journeyman iron worker and a member of Socialist Alternative. Yeah, I'm speaking in defense of my brothers and sisters in the public sector. They're always the first under attack when governments can't squeeze enough out of working people. And this austerity budgeting that's being pushed by Mayor Durkin, follows the same union busting logic employed by Republicans like Governor Scott Walker, who used the cover of budget shortfalls during the last economic crash to pass right to work legislation that ended up being extended to the private sector and to the building trades as well. And yeah, we absolutely cannot stand for this, where for years, companies like Amazon have set up shop and made massive profits, paying no taxes, while working families' rent skyrocketed. Where Democrats increase funding for the police by nearly half in just over half a decade. I think it's 42% in 6 years. While frontline workers providing services and resources that help our communities and protect workers on the job are every year under the axe, right? And where, there's 160 million to go toward building, the most expensive police precinct in North America, which would have been the North Precinct back in, I think that was like 2016. There's 160 million for that, but when, building permanently affordable publicly owned housing to combat gentrification, which has been displacing, thousands, tens of thousands of working class people from the city, predominantly working class people of color, out of areas like the Central District, like the South End, the International District, right? Where just that those are choices to be made, right? And we have a political establishment that chooses consistently to spend money on a youth jail and not on the things that our communities actually need. And as a union member and a socialist, I refuse to accept any attack on the protections, the employment, or the quality of life of other workers, right? I understand that if the ruling class and their political establishment succeed in crushing city workers, they'll be coming for me next. And I think that same understanding, right, extends to any working class person, right? When there's an attack on the Black communities, right? Like that doesn't end there, right? The brutality of the police, doesn't just end at that point. It definitely dials back, right? But I think as we've seen with the escalation of police brutality in response to these protests, and if you look at the history of the labor movement, where if you stand against this system that perpetuates, creates and perpetuates racism and bigotry in order to squeeze further, sections of the working class further, and also to divide worker from worker. It's not in the interest of any worker to allow that kind of division or that kind of exploitation or oppression of any of us on any basis. And blaming workers with union wages and pensions for budget shortfalls from regressive taxation is the same argument of blaming labor costs for the high cost of housing, right? The problem isn't the workers. The problem is the despicable hoarding of wealth by the bosses. And so, yeah, where the city gets its money and how that money's spent is absolutely a labor issue. So I appeal to city workers and their unions to join our people's budget to fight the mayor's austerity. I would also appeal to the Martin Luther King County Labor Council and all unions to stand with our sisters and brothers in rejecting this anti-worker proposal from the mayor, and to throw the weight of our collective power into protecting them and protecting the many workers in the city who benefit from the work that these public sector workers do. And, you know, I think that our labor movement here in Seattle took an incredible step forward. Just kind of losing track of time during the pandemic with everything going on, but it was I think it was last week where, yeah, the Labor Council voted to expel the Seattle Police Officers Guild from the council, right? Where the police have been given years, you know, the entirety of their time affiliated with the Labor Council to try and, you know, reform itself, right, with the guidance of the federal government, with, you know, the pressure put on them by other labor unions to stop using excessive force, stop practicing racist policing, and this failed, and that they were held accountable for that. But you know, we're not done there. So yeah, I appeal to all labor trade union members, labor unions, and our labor council to join our movement in demanding defund SPD, cut the budget by at least 50%, and spend that money on programs that working people need, right? You can't police your way into good jobs for people. You can't police your way into providing decent housing for people. You can't police your way into combating racism, right? And so, yeah, and also in the other, you know, that the labor take up taxing Amazon. We need progressive taxation. Washington State has the most regressive taxation structure of any state in the country. And that means that, Teal talked about numbers, right? Working people, if I remember correctly, working people spend 6 times on taxes what the rich do proportional to their income in this state. And so that's, you know, that means that, you know, we need schools, we need bridges, we need, you know, we need healthcare, we need all of this infrastructure to guarantee us a decent quality of life. And that has to get paid for. And so, you know, when you have a 10% sales tax and property taxes increase anytime you want to fund your park, well, property tax, you know, increasing gas taxes, you know, I think we see that people are rejecting that burden being put on regular people, but that, you know, we can't do without those services, especially when cutting those services isn't a colorblind issue, right? There are communities that have been historically deprived of the resources that they need. And, you know, we need progressive funding to make the people who actually benefit from this dynamic, you know, to make the rich pay for their crisis and pay for, you know, repairing damage that's been done in order for them to collect their profits. That means taxing Amazon. You know, no more taxes on working people, make big business pay for their crisis. We need green union jobs and affordable public housing to begin to address, you know, the incredible, unprecedented amount of unemployment in this city, and also to create a public alternative to the private market that's failed working people. You know, gentrification is not, you know, it's a dynamic that it's a process that is economic, right? Historically, you know, in Seattle, we saw there's still the legacy of redlining of districts that you know, cut off sections of the city so that, you know, people couldn't live there if they were people of color, if they were Jewish, right? But those laws have been off the books for quite some time, and yet still, you know, we see frankly racist budgeting, you know, and a racist anti-worker distribution of the resources that ultimately working people like ourselves create all of those resources. And so, you know, I think putting forward a demand that these be distributed based on need and to meet human need is a step forward. Because I agree completely with Tilshon, where it's like you can't say you can't get up on a stage, especially people with the power to vote on these budgets, who and to introduce amendments to make them benefit working people and communities of color, right? You don't get to just come out and say Black Lives Matter and then go back to doing the same stuff you were doing last year, right? We need real changes. And so, every council member should be supporting the full tax Amazon. We don't need there's not a sunset clause on the taxes that I pay. And so why should there be a sunset clause on the taxes that big business pay? So we need to defund SPD and spend that money on repairing the damage done to community. And we need to tax big business to begin investing in our communities by, providing green union jobs and building permanently affordable publicly owned housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Logan. And I hope all the public sector workers who are watching this, or if you know people who are in the public sector, including in the city of Seattle, please join us at the community meeting preparing for the budget committee next week. That's Wednesday, July 1st at 9 a.m. That's an online meeting. But also importantly, join us on Wednesday, July 8th at 6 p.m. for the organizing meeting, because we need to get organized. And Mayor Durkan says the budget cuts are unavoidable. Absolutely not. That is a complete lie, especially in a city as wealthy as Seattle. The budget cuts are completely avoidable. All it means is that corporate establishment politicians will not fight for us. They will stand with big business and attempt to thrust the entire burden of the recession on us. And who do you think faces the worst hammer blows of budget cuts? It is our communities of color. So the same people who face police violence are also the same people who are going to be on the front line of facing job losses, of facing furloughs, mandatory furloughs, and everything up to food insecurity. And so we are talking about real problems in a very wealthy city, and we need to fight back. And that's what it means for us to say Black Lives Matter. So very quickly, I wanted to let all the speakers know we have many speakers here, and unfortunately, not everybody will be able to speak for too long. But we thought it was important, even if people speak for short, for a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes or 4 minutes. I think it is important that we hear the entire spectrum of voices. So I just want to read the list of names so the speakers know where you are on the speakers list. Next, we'll have Algier Hawkins, and I'll introduce him in a second. Then we'll have Joey Weiser, Ryan Watson, Dan McGraw, Hannah Lake, Josh Castle, Violet Levitine, Maya Garfinkel, Asaya Corbray, Reverend Robert Jeffrey, Reverend Kerry Anderson, Reverend Angela Ying, Deepa Sivarajan, and that's going to be an incredible spectrum of our community. It's a multiracial working class community fighting for racial justice and for economic justice. So it's my pleasure now to invite Algier Hawkins, who is a member and organizer of Socialist Alternative in New York City. He is also a member of Socialist Alternative's National Committee, which is the highest national leadership body in the organization. Algier traveled to Ferguson in 2014 following the law enforcement killing of Michael Brown, and to Minneapolis in 2015 after the killing of Jamar Clark. Algier has been a Black revolutionary socialist for 25 years and has written extensively on the Black freedom movement and socialism. Welcome, Algier.
Thank you for having me. I think it's important to recognize that the rebellion began 1 month ago today, actually. It was May 25th when George Floyd died by the hands of law enforcement in Minneapolis. And this rebellion has placed a major question on capitalism, American democracy, can it produce a dignified life for working people, the poor, and particularly the oppressed. If we think about George Floyd, he encompasses 3 processes that we're living through right now. On one side, he was COVID-19 positive, probably asymptomatic. Also, him being a Black man within the United States. and that he was accused of having a counterfeit $20 bill, which showed the precariousness of the economic reality for many working people and poor people of this nation. And the demands of this rebellion has placed a bullseye on the very nature of neoliberal capitalism, the system based on profits for a super elite, particularly the Jeff Bezos, who's about to become the first trillionaire in human and world history. So it's going to be very important, I think, to fortify our rebellion with organization, political clarity, program, and strategy to win actual material gains for ordinary working people. The beauty of this moment is that overall, in all 50 states and even around the world, the rebellion has been multiracial. It has been working class. It has been young people led. It is centered around people of color in particular. And this has struck the fear of God into the political and economic establishment of this country. And we've seen a small segment of the labor movement has stood up and talked about and rejected the very insidious role that the police unions play within the labor movement. While at the same time, as Shama pointed out, that Amazon and some of the major corporations in this country giving millions of dollars to the various foundations and benevolent associations of law enforcement and of police unions. What has also emerged is the fact that our workplaces, which is probably the most integrated place in society, but is also a place where it is controlled. It's a dictatorship of the bosses. And so if we can combine our struggle around workplace demands and social struggle on the street, and this has been done historically, we can in fact produce a powerful force that can be a counterweight to the open attempts of co-optation by the Democratic Party, by the various appendage organizations and corporate America that's given close to $2 billion to various social justice organizations and BLM affiliates. We also have to reject the performative acts of wearing kente cloth and kneeling, while the same forces that do that will, in fact, put forth a austerity budget that will cut key social and public spending for working people, the poor, and specifically people of color. Thousands of layoffs, particularly in the city that I'm born and raised here in New York. 22,000 is being suggested that the public sector will lose in jobs. The increased amount of unemployment as the lines grow, as people try to find some level of relief because of the economic crisis. So I've been a Black socialist for the past 25 years. And so Black Marxism and socialism has been in the United States since the early 1900s. And so the struggle for education and jobs and housing and healthcare is the cornerstone of us engaging in a struggle to dismantle the institutions and the edifice of racism, of hate, and capitalist oppression. And so the struggle for a people's budget and the movement for a people's budget to not only tax Amazon, but to also defund the police by at least 50%. We are seeing a campaign here in New York explode. There was a mass protest just today around the demand to defund the NYPD, which their budget is $6 billion here in the city. And so while we face a major budget crisis, and so it's going to be absolutely paramount that the way that we can strengthen our struggle is to invoke the words of the iconic Frederick Douglass. Power concedes nothing without a demand, never did and never will. And so with the question of defund SPD, to defund the police by 50% and to raise the demand of tax Amazon is a crucial element of really attacking capitalist rule. And keep in mind that law enforcement's primary role is to protect the private property, protect the profits, protect the prestige and the power of the Jeff Bezos of the world.
Thank you, Algier. That was incredibly important for us to share the accounts of our experiences across cities, and it's important that Algier pointed out that this is the same situation in other cities. So imagine the kind of impact we can have if we are able to win both the Amazon tax and the strongest possible Amazon tax, and defunding Seattle Police Department by 50%. There's no question that it will inspire future struggles in other cities as well, like we are inspired by struggles elsewhere. And so, on that note, I wanted to invite Joey Weiser, who is a lifelong Seattleite who serves as the chair of communications for the 43rd Legislative District Democrats. His activism started with the death of Trayvon Martin in 2015, and he's been on the front lines of the recent Seattle protests, live streaming police brutality since day one. Welcome, Joey.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, I'm out here right now at the Mohi Museum of History and Industry with several thousand Black Lives Matter protesters who are here in support of the LGBT community. I'm here as an individual representing, but I appreciate you guys' time. I wanted to speak to y'all as a member of the 43rd. I'm the communications chair, and 2 weeks ago, I was proud to join with other Democratic leaders in the 43rd and the 36th Legislative District in passing a resolution, and we got to sign a letter calling on Mayor Durkan to resign over her handling of the protests and her refusal to defund the Seattle Police Department. So I wanted to read that letter aloud for you guys and then run back over to the protests, if that's all right with you. It goes like this: to Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan and Seattle City Council members. We, the undersigned, call on Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan to resign from office, or the Seattle City Council to remove her for Mayor Durkan's failure to stop the Seattle Police Department from engaging in violence against its residents, for her failure to protect the safety of our communities, specifically our Black community, the homeless, and peaceful protesters, and for violating the accepted standards of our community by excusing and defending the violence used against our families, friends, and neighbors. If Mayor Durkan refuses to resign, the Seattle City Council must remove her from office according to the provision of the city charter. Her removal will enable her successor and the Seattle City Council to heed community demands to defund the police, to protect and expand investments to make our community safe, and to not prosecute protesters. Mayor Jenny Durkan was elected by Democrats, and we feel obligated as Democrats to address her failure, both to protect protesters from violence caused by the Seattle Police Department, and to respond to the demands of protesters and Black-led community groups to defund the Seattle Police Department, invest in Black communities, and release all protesters. Just like it's the responsibility of white people to address the systemic racism that we created and benefit from, we also believe that allies should do the work to keep political pressure on a mayor elected mostly by Democrats. Our group is in consultation with multiple Black organizers who are leading the charge to defund SPD and build a Seattle where Black lives matter. We fully support the call by leaders in the Black community to defund Seattle Police. It is important to state that we do not view removing Mayor Durkan as our end goal. Rather, as she has demonstrated indifference at best and active opposition at worst to the goal of defunding Seattle Police Department to protect Black lives by investing and expanding community safety and well-being beyond policing, we feel her removal from office is a necessary first step towards achieving these goals. So that's the letter. Let me see if I can get myself back. There we go. And as you can see, the momentum is not stopping anytime soon. We have thousands of people out here. It's a beautiful energy, and I encourage you guys to check it out if you haven't already. As an individual, not as a member of the 43rd, I say tax the hell out of Amazon. You guys are doing amazing. Any way I can support, please let me know. Okay, back to you.
Thank you so much, Joey, and thank you for sharing the image of the protest that's going on out there. And it's really important that the Black Lives Matter movement and Pride Month are coinciding. It really is a reminder that we have to fight against all oppression, and we have to stand with one another in solidarity. We have, as I said, we have many incredible speakers, but very quickly, I wanted to invite our second out-of-town speaker because they're in a different time zone, and I want to make sure we don't keep them up too long, but I really appreciate all the speakers who have joined us today. And I apologize that it's getting a little bit of time to get to you. But as I said, it's important that we have so many voices in this people's budget, because this is not one organization or one individual. This is thousands of people who are being represented through the speakers who are speaking tonight. So next, I'd like to invite Ryan Watson, who like Algier and myself, is a member and organizer of Socialist Alternative in Chicago, and is also a member of Socialist Alternative's National Committee. In 2015, Ryan was part of the initial on-the-ground protest in Ferguson, multiple times using the on-the-ground lessons there. Only a few years later, unfortunately, that happened around the police killing of Lacan McDonald. He has also been Ryan has also been part of the Ram Resign movement, connecting it to the labor movement and the immigrant rights movements and the movement around Bernie Sanders in 2016. Ryan is a firm believer that a movement for Black lives will require a socialist outlook, as he is convinced that capitalism itself requires racism. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Shama. As she said, I'm born and raised on the west side of Chicago. And I just want to start with a quote that I gave to a crowd on June 6th. We had about 25 to 35,000 Illinoisans in the Chicago area. And we marched to Cabrini Green, which is infamous in its own right. And in some ways, it's very much the personification of the quote that I'm about to have. If a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem. And if he's got the power to lynch me, that's my problem. Racism is not a question of attitude, it's a question of power. Racism gets its power from capitalism. Thus, if you're anti-racist, whether you know it or not, you must be anti-capitalist. The power for racism, the power for sexism comes from capitalism, not an attitude. And that's a quote from Stokely Carmichael that has stuck with me since the moment that I read it. And this quote and many others, readings from Frederick Douglass, like what Algier put forth, Claudia Jones, Martin Luther King, Ella Baker, Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, Fannie Lou Hamer, Angela Davis, Huey Newton, and so many more, are why I think that it's for true emancipation of Black people, it must be tied to the liberation of all working people. Political activity in some scale has always been close to me ever since like even 9 years old, where my father was an alderman or the equivalent of a council member there, where he would actually have me and my siblings out on the picket line in 94 or 93, when we took notice that the then mayor, Democrat Richard Daley, was willing to invest jobs and money in a very rich downtown area, while the neighborhood that my father represented, in just slightly west of downtown, had an average income of only $16,000 at that time. My father took a clear stance that Black Chicagoans deserved the same level of investment that the North Side and downtown had. And he used his seat to advocate for the dumping of Daley, back in a period where there wasn't a resign movement that was popular, growing. And in response, that same Democratic city, with all of the alderpersons of all genders and colors, including Black people who would be unwilling to talk to my father after he came out against Daley, turned their backs and used a coordinated goal to oust him from his position. And a year later, and $500,000 in the 90s, they were successful. And just 2 years after that, they raised the wages of those alderpersons from $50,000 a year to $100,000+ a year, almost more than 100%. 20 years later, that the rally that I spoke at, which had 20 to 30,000 people, was in the very ward of that same alderman. And that man has been in that seat for 26 years. And during that time, median household income has grown by only to $22,000, which, if you think about inflation, is probably actually less money than what it actually is at that point. And in the midst of that period, hundreds of thousands of Black Chicagoans have been priced out and have been pushed out into the city, drawing out an exodus of over 10,000 Black families per year. And that alderman is one of 8 Black Democrats who received $300,000 in campaign donations from Rahm Emanuel to vote to sweep Laquan McDonald's murder under the carpet by giving the family $5 million. and if you aren't familiar with him, he's infamously known for being shot 16 times on camera by James Van Dyke, a police officer. And actually, in the midst of that rally, despite this information, there was a conversation of allowing him to speak up as a notion of support for George Floyd. This is what I would consider to be truly what we see around a notion of co-optation, is that someone who has had the ability and the time and the energy to be able to fight for Black lives in America, or in Chicago specifically, has done nothing of this sort, but has padded his pockets. And I think this is an important backstory because the fact that he was giving a speaking spot at a George Floyd rally, in my opinion, is that to him, Black lives only matter when it's his own or his family. And I have to echo Angela Davis's quote that says, "There are Black people I do not want to be in unity with." And the reality is, we're going to require a large motion of fighting working people to be able to win, and that there are lots of class dimensions that are involved that isolates us from other members of the Black community. And I think it's really clear in the lessons that Ella Baker draws out in her speech to Puerto Rico in 1974, when she was reflecting on the fact that someone, when she was a child, called her the N-word. She said, "I struck him back. And then I had to learn that hitting back with my fists, one individual, was not enough. It takes an organization. It takes dedication. It takes the willingness to stand by and do what has to be done and when it has to be done." And then she goes on to say, "You and I cannot be free in America or anywhere else where there is capitalism and imperialism." And so I, for one, think that this idea, this organization, and this motion of fighting, of having a multiracial, multi-generational, multi-gendered
41, President Roosevelt signed an Executive Order 8802. Nobody probably knows what that number means. Because originally, I didn't know. I didn't know that this was one of the leading causes into creating a space for non-discrimination in workplace. So this is a monumental day, and even though that this wasn't made into a formal law, it really started the path for the civil rights movement and many acts that led to follow by acknowledging that we need to clear discrimination against race, creed, sexual orientation, national origins, all of that, specifically in the defense industry and for government work. And so the Museum of History and Industry, it felt like it was a beautiful location. It's located right here on the lake, absolutely beautiful views. And this compound was built in 1941. So it was actually built the same year that the executive order was put in place. And it used to be a compound, it served as an advanced naval training school during World War II. And inside there is a massive drill hall, and which is where they used to practice and perform military drills. And it was used by the Naval Reserve training for thousands of young recruits for service in war. So it was eventually, after World War II, it was decommissioned, and then it was made a National Historic Landmark in 2009, so several years later. And in 2012, they got this beautiful renovation into being made what we now know as the MOHI. It's an amazing museum. It features so many different collections. They do have several collections that highlight the Black movement, which is awesome. And so I felt like this was the perfect place for us to
please give a very respectful and warm welcome to Levi.
expect it to be so overwhelmingly amazing. Just wow. Like, you guys look great. The sun is shining. As a matter of fact, take your phones out, face the sun, and get a quick selfie with a stranger. You guys look fucking amazing. Like, you look really good. So, I won't be for you very long. I just had some things that I've been working on lately, and I just feel like it was a perfect one to share. This is my third protest, and the first time I've been active in a protest, so I wanted to, this is the perfect platform, this is the perfect place today, so excuse me, I have my retainer and I'll be a little bit of this. So in the words of my girl, Sire Renee Taylor, if you don't already, you should. What's up, y'all? And thank you for being here. It's amazing to see you all here. And thank you to Jake for creating this space. All the amazing speakers and the performers that are coming. So like Jake said, I'm Levi. I'm a Seattle resident now for about just over 3 years. I'm to the beach and have a dog. Netflix and I can go out service. Alright, so I'm originally from Flint, Michigan. A lot of you may know Flint, Michigan as a city who is still enduring a water crisis in the most developed nation in the world, which is fucking despicable, but that's a conversation for another day. Alright, and I'm a service member. I have been since November of 2009, and it has not been an easy road joining a pre-DABT thing. Alright? And I want to talk to you today about that experience and how my experience is not so uncommon from many of you. But before we do this, I want you all to do an exercise, and I want you to do it honestly. Alright? I want you to close your eyes. Go ahead and close them. I promise the person next to you is an eye in your backpack. But close your eyes, and I want you to imagine someone you love very deeply. When I say love deeply, I want you to imagine whether it be your parent, your partner, your child, her child, a friend, or someone you love very deeply. And think about how much you two really love each other and lean into that feeling. Lean into it as hard as you can. How safe and secure you are when you're around each other. Think about how much you miss each other when you're apart. Think about how much you protect each other and the respect you have for one another, and focus on that really hard. Now imagine a world where everyone felt the way you're feeling right now, regardless of their walk of life, orientation, social economic status, and take a deep breath. Now open your eyes. Now I challenge you with this. What if you wake up every day and endeavor to make someone you didn't know feel the way you just felt? That's what leading with love looks like. When it permeates your very being and you focus on it daily, imagine what a world we would have. But let's be honest, we don't. And that is exactly why we're here today. The truth is, the challenge of doing the work to lead with love takes a lot. It takes unlearning some toxic habits and beliefs you've learned to protect yourself over the years. It takes seeing the best in a person when maybe the last time you saw them, they showed you their worst. It takes loving in a way that is unconditional. I'm reminded of a passage my grandmother used to read to me as a child about love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant. It's not rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never ends. So if this is love, then the average good person who you know says they have love in their hearts, then why do we live in a world where this type of love is so challenging? Today we honor the pioneers who fought before us. Gladys Bentley, Marsha P. Johnson, Bernard Augustine, Stanley Belgrade, Elvis Borden, I will stay here when I get done to get those names and look them up. Because you need to know. Because we owe it to them to lead with love. We've seen the stories, we've heard the stats. Some of us may even be one of those numbers, or have someone close to us who is one of those numbers. Growing up in an underserved city to strictly Christian conservative parents, my story is like many of you. Feeling trapped without the freedom to be who you really want to be, joining an organization at a time when your life and your choices weren't valued, and you still lived a life in the shadows, enduring trauma and not really knowing how to love yourself. Lead with love was such a foreign concept. We struggle to see ourselves daily, making it virtually impossible for anyone else to see us, let alone us see anyone else. Well, each day the universe grants us a new opportunity to be that person we were so terrified to be for so many years. We must educate our allies as well as our adversaries, continuously leading by example to show them the way, acknowledging and rooting out the daily microaggressions that we allow to happen silently, holding each other and those around us accountable, holding our legislators to a higher standard, spending our money with businesses and people that value us, and using our purse powers for good. Now, riddle me this. Seattle has only so many personalities, but so often we see these entertainment hubs cater to just one part of our community. It's the truth. Why? Why don't we see more POC nights at these clubs that we frequent? I'll take it one step further. Why do we even need a POC night in a city like Seattle? It's literally working all four corners of the globe. We, by nature of our inclusion, or lack thereof, create a culture excluding a significant demographic of our community. We must be uncomfortable, and I mean bothered to the core, by the sexualization, fetish boasting of our Black and POC queer bodies, especially our trans sisters who are used at midnight and dead by night. Of white supremacy and lack of diversity in our culture. Have you noticed the deficit in advertisement, merchandise, and products that are pride-oriented this year? Those businesses we spend so much money on alienated us when they didn't have a reason to exploit Pride season. Well, I don't care what they say. Pride isn't canceled. We aren't canceled, and Black queer is sure as hell not canceled. And been abandoned come July 1st. All right? How many of us are holding these establishments accountable? From music to food to fashion to entertainment, queer, Black, Indigenous people of color have influenced nearly every single thing that you enjoy. Yet we tolerate the lack of representation in our own backyard. Well, time is up, and we have got to do better. I'm not going to pretend this is easy work. For some of us, the world we want to see may not happen in this lifetime, but we owe it to our children as much as we owe it to our ancestors to fight tooth and nail to get as close as possible, leaving a mark on this planet and a mantle for them to bear. For my allies in the crowd, I see you, I love you, we're here with you. But what about when the music stops? When the gatherings disperse, the news stops reporting, the posts stop trending, what will you do then? Because that's when the real work starts. Now that we have opened the conversation, we've disturbed the peace, we've gathered the masses, how do we use this momentum to create change that lasts for generations? Who will we elect to represent our interests? Where will we spend our time, talent, and money? These are questions we have to be continuously reminded of. The queer community has enough woes not to continue to self-inflict indifference on our own time. The resources at our disposal are endless. When there's no table, we build it. When there's no seat, we take it. When there's a lock on the door, we blow that bitch down. Yeah. Woo! What we can't do is remain silent. Although you have the right to, you just cannot simply remain silent. Check this and challenge. I'm almost done with you. Educate yourself about things that scare you and things you don't understand. Arm yourself with facts. I saw a post online the other day that said your conservative friends and family members aren't watching your tweets or reading your news stories. They're watching Fox News. Yep. And if we don't assertively and passionately educate them, how else will they know? Some of these people have felt this way all their lives. It's all they know. To shatter that system of beliefs is painful. It's alienating. Now, I am in no way giving a racist or a bigot a pass. Fuck no, okay? But if they do choose to listen to you, if they do choose to sit down and have a conversation, you begin to break down the barriers with your facts, and then they leave you and go back to the people that believe the way they used to believe and get cast out. You have to remind them that there is room in your end for them to come stay. And you have to love them through their transition. Now, I want you to turn and look at the person with someone you don't know. Shift around a little if you have to. Remember that feeling you felt earlier, the love you felt? Look them in the eyes and exchange that overwhelming feeling of love and security with the perfect stranger. That, my dear queers and allies, is how you lead with love. Be at peace, go at peace, show kindness, and teach love. And remember, if the spirit in me loves the spirit in you, it needs to be love. Thank you.
Exactly how I thought it was going to go. That was amazing. Thank you for getting that message from all of the do you feel good after that? Do you feel good? Because you should. So this next conversation is actually going to be held by myself. And it's one that I take kind of personally, and that I'm going to be speaking to everybody here, but I really want those that are Black to hone in and listen, because I want you guys to understand that the issue with mental health that is stemming from racism, it exists, and you need to address it for your own peace, and you need to take care of yourself. And so, members of the Black community have faced mental health issues dealing with layers of racism in society for as long as society has been around, as long as racism has been around. And especially it's very high right now that we're dealing with these mental health issues during the current crisis of this country, with Black people being targeted and so much tension. So some of the things that we're dealing with probably right now and that we've been dealing with is feeling disconnected and lonely. You may feel like you have all the support in the world, but at the end of the day, it's yourself that you have to go to bed with your own thoughts and your own fears. And that can make you feel disconnected, and it can make you feel really lonely. You second guess things. You ask yourself, should I go to that party that I've been invited? Am I going to be the only Black guy? Am I going to be the only Black girl? Are people going to look at me like I stick out like a sore thumb? You always have to question every move that you're doing. Decreased hope. It comes from seeing movement in the streets, and to follow is the same racism that has always existed. So we've seen it in 2016 with the Ferguson movement for Michael Brown. And you start to lose hope when you see that name diminishing more and more in the news. I looked recently and I feel like I don't even see George Floyd's name in the main media anymore. And I'm hoping to see his name, I'm hoping to see Elijah McClain's name, I'm hoping to see all of these names repeated, because these stories and these lives right now, they matter, and they need to be continued to be heard day after day after day. Increased survival mode. It's feeling like whenever you leave your home, you have to be prepared for some shit to go down. You're wondering if I'm gonna walk down the street, is a police gonna pass me because I'm wearing a suspicious outfit of sweats and a hoodie? Trayvon Martin was wearing a hoodie and was killed. And so it makes you feel like every move that you make, we're making it right, guys, we're gonna decreased trust. The way that I've seen some people that I personally know respond to what's going on, I almost felt like I didn't know anymore who I could even trust. These are people that I went to school with. These are people that I have went to parties with and done all of these things, and I'm seeing the way that their silence is a lot louder than anything. Worry. We have a reason to worry. We're seeing people in the news that look like us being killed constantly. Increased risk of depression and anxiety. My heart races when I thought